Okay, so Sarita, we have sort of shared the schedule with, the list with everyone, and the logic was to move from personal or family archives into community or research-based archives to something more institutional. So that's how we've gone about it, and we'll
Okay.
keep to 8 minutes, 4 minutes for them to present, and 4 minutes for your responses.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, Richa, over to you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Ishita, and thank you, Sarita.
Yeah.
So we are developing the Auroville digital archives. So currently, Auroville is a dynamic community, a forest community of over 3,000 residents from 52 nationalities. So that's a broad, like very brief orientation of what Auroville is. Auroville, it's basically constituted under the Auroville Foundation Act 1991.
Yeah.
It comes under the administrative control of HRD ministry. Basically, it's an autonomous body under the Ministry of Human Resource Development. So that's the brief orientation of what Auroville is.
Yeah.
Now, what we are trying to do is the Auroville Digital Archive. So there was a team which was building up the Auroville archives. It was fairly informal because it was completely a community endeavor. It still continues to be a community endeavor. So there were these photographs and footages from the earlier days, uh, quite random. Nothing was categorized and everything. So there was a team which was creating a sort of a compilation of all the archival material that was there. But the critical aspect is to kind of record the organic growth of the community in form of chronologies. Certain people have created chronological compilations of the happenings, incidents, historical incidents of Auroville, and the curations and periodicals. So this is what is the task which is primarily in front of me, as I come from a documentary filmmaking background. So I'm more interested in the curation, the audiovisual curatorial aspect of this entire process, which is like my main forte. So we are looking at an archive that is archive not only of the static history but rather a dynamic community aspect to it, which is constantly in flux. So, for example, if a newcomer, I'm still a newcomer, but if another newcomer wants to curate his experience as he attended the 50th anniversary of Auroville, say for example, then it will be his curation. It will be his photographs. And it will be his annotation of the photographs that he has contributed to the archive. So this will make the archive a participatory archive. Anybody can contribute as a form of a catalog. And technical assistance we can give, the Auroville archives can give in creating the catalog. So how exactly to create categories that can accommodate and also enable cross-referencing and cross linkages within the larger input, because the input is so varied, but still it has its themes and compartments, but it's jumping all over. So we don't know how to sort that. So technically, it's the technological issue which can be cracked, server space and all of that. But from an archiving perspective, is the issue of the categorizing and cataloging. That's the second issue we are facing. And the third issue that we faced so far was where to draw the thin line between being an archivist and being an artist in terms of curatorial decisions. But then for the digital platform, we went away with the idea of a clean, clear archive. We said that, okay, fine, we jump into a curatorial space. Because at the end of the day, it is a curation. Archive itself is a curation of somebody's, it is a collection of somebody collected and somebody discarded something. So what to keep and what to discard is always a question.
The first question I had, of course, was what is the sort of classification formats that you're using for your curation, the buckets. And I feel while you do want to allow for, inclusivity and sort of participation, it might be important at this stage to create some sort of broad categories under which people should be allowed, should be encouraged to sort of contribute, right? So whatever the categories are, it could be, you know, architecture, food, craft, or it could be sort of personal experiences versus a day in the life of, or whatever, you know, those sort of things. So create some sort of framework. I think without a framework, you're going to be struggling. So I would say that, you know, however much I know that Auroville is sort of everyone participates, and there is a sort of freedom of expression and things like that. Someone has to take a call and create at least a starting framework. Later, it
Yeah,
can be evolved and added on to, but decide on, say, 10 to
yeah,
start, you know, just
yeah.
any old figure, and create sort of 10 sort of broad frameworks under which people can contribute. And then you'll, of course, have voices saying that, but it doesn't fit in, mine doesn't fit into 10. Then you say, okay, add another one, or have a miscellaneous or whatever else, but create a sort of framework, because I believe you're still looking at it from the perspective of people who are collecting and contributing, and not from the perspective of people who are viewing and experiencing.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
So I think if you sort of switch your lens and start looking at it from the lens of who is experiencing, and then create sort of broad classifications and contributions for contributors to sort of put together, then you might have something that's a little bit more front-facing rather than back-end sort of driven. The second is, while you're creating albums, are you also, for instance, creating sort of a narrative space, a space for narration? I mean, you know, maybe within those folders of albums, are you having, say, just a simple Word doc that allows people to talk of their stories and connect them?
Yeah.
Um, uh, so that people can read them in some way. So are these going to be folders? Are they going to be some form of a blog format? When you're doing your meta tagging, are you allowing for people to sort of search through tags or meta tags? So therefore I can see all food related or whatever else sort of curation, so to speak, in one space. Those are things that I think you should question.
Yeah, I got your point that yeah, it is overwhelming, and as you say that instead of looking at it from the backside, it's important to visualize, from the user's end, and then try to design, the process itself.
Yeah, and secondly, recognize that this still might be an intermediate stage. It might be too much to say that this is the front facing. Say that this is an intermediate stage. There will be one more stage which is a little bit more front facing,
Right, right.
and maybe use only one aspect of it to become the front facing.
Kamal, over to you.
I'm just going to read it. So, this project seeks to understand the significance of vernacular family photographs in greater political and social movements. On my mother's side of the family, the grandson of my great-great-grandfather, Nagam Krishna Rao, was highly involved in the Telangana movement. Nagam kept an album of the movement, which he showed me when he was alive. The photographs that I am interested in are those that show the procession of him coming back from jail. I think he went to jail multiple times. The visualization of this project can be about trying to piece together a family and political narrative based on missing information. It will involve explicitly sharing how personal knowledge is scaffolded. So first thing is like my own personal inquiry, then familial conversations and primary sources, inquiries and guesses, and then using secondary sources to fill in gaps of knowledge. So I'm curious about how are we a spectator to our family archive when our lives may feel decontextualized from the events in the photograph? How can I become a participant by looking at photographs of this movement? These were some of my inquiries that I had that I came up with last time. So my idea for visualization is to think about how knowledge is built and gathered, what is seen on the surface of the picture or photograph based on pure observation, what is seen on the surface of the picture based on prior personal knowledge, and how can we zoom in and zoom out on a photograph. how do we zoom in and show other family members like what they see in a photograph? So from that, the secondary part is researching Telangana with books, and then going back to the picture to see if the book informs anything, and then going back to interviews and interviewing scholars. And yeah, so basically thinking about what is the significance of doing a project like this about a political movement as a person of the diaspora, and how does language, community, nationality get carried across time and space, and how do we visualize the building of knowledge? So there's different photographs. I visited him in 2014 where he was still alive, which was right around when the state split. And this is the album, which has archival photos. And so my mom does some translation for me. So this one says, welcome in Telangana, Jay Telangana. He started helped start the Bad Telangana, I guess it's like a group. I mean, I guess the whole thing, my project is really about like, so there's this greater political movement, and then I am finding like family photos. So I guess like what the curation would really be about, like that personal discovery of something bigger, and kind of what is the revision of knowledge as you're kind of creating it, and trying to figure out if that's even like something interesting to people, or it's like, is there an interesting way to present it? It would probably be a little bit like socio-political, a little bit like having some of the archival artistic license.
My gut says that, you know, this, I mean, while it'll definitely be of interest to sort of people within your family and sort of associated with your family, I think it would have even more meaning. It would become more meaningful for people even within your family if you can broaden its sort of relevance to those who are outside and of the family. And to do that, maybe what you might have to do is to connect it to other, like which you have mentioned in your document, I think, broaden it to, or connect it to sort of other events, other people who might be associated with Nagam, right?
Yeah.
With Nagam. And I think sort of allow the original archive, the core archive, to sort of draw out to other connections with links, even if it is digitally. So I'm imagining that there are people who were closely associated with him who have played a major role in sort of in the evolution of the state's history, relevance to sort of national level movements, events, personalities. I'm very, very sure that there is a lot of interest there. And people within the family often are not as aware of all these sort of cross connections. I think your archive will be richer for those looking up, zooming out, so to speak, and then going down to sort of specifics or to sort of details.
Yeah, that's, and I think for me it's like, is it important to have a very, because the knowledge is so new to me, so to have a very factual, like, you know, really accurate historical knowledge. So I don't know if there's like I don't have a PhD in the Telangana movement or anything, so how to not give false knowledge, and it is highly politicized too.
So I think the way to sort of work around the fact that you might not personally have the knowledge or the sort of factual data in place might be for you to link what is there in your existing database of sort of archival elements to other sources that are outside in the digital space.
Okay.
So it could be films. There are a lot of films I know about the Telangana movement or of events that happened. So you, as a curator, might, and you could link them to sort of YouTube links or to sort of other databases, to sort of news links, news articles, and see how then there'll be a little bit more meaning towards this. The other is if you can sort of open out the content to people who might want to contribute.
Oh, okay. Yeah, yeah. That makes
So
sense.
you could ask people, maybe Nagam's immediate relatives, wife, children, might know that so-and-so worked with him or was with him when he came back from jail, for instance. And would they have a story to tell? So you could record and put up oral histories of that. And from there might be a nugget that then draws you to the next level and things like that.
So I'll just briefly explain what the project is about. So this is a project from my son, who's 2.5, and this is the only grandparent that he met in the 1.5 years that my father-in-law was around. So I wanted to save all the memories that we had of him through conversations, through objects that we see around in the house, because a large part of our house is objects and books and various things that my parents-in-law collected. We live in their house. So the audience, the limitation for me was one of that of space, because I really wanted our house to be the exhibition space, and also the audience being somebody of such a young age. So this was my limitation, but it also worked for me very well to create that as a framework. The challenges that I have right now is how do I accommodate, there are narratives which I have which do not have images, and there are images that are just beautiful images but do not particularly have narratives, and also how I am going to accommodate oral history for him to access. But the question that you had asked me was very, very relevant, where how do I let this exhibition grow with him as a child to an older child or an adult. So to answer that question, I would think I would split it into two. One that of what can be visually possible in the house, and the other one maybe I can save it as a blog or something, but I'm not going to, that is stage 2 for me. So right now I'm going to limit it to him as a child, not of this age, but once he starts understanding. So that's where I am. Narratives I have based on the experiences and the sentiments, or the qualities. I would actually take the liberty of saying virtues, because we really saw a lot of virtues in him. So I'm taking those as the realms and giving examples of what happened in his life, and also using the photographs that can kind of fit into that story. So that's where I am with respect. What I would like to do is like make a little note, like a postcard, maybe laminated or something, and tuck it behind the photograph in such a way that he can pull it out, read it, and put it back. And because that is one challenge that I have found, that I cannot really put the narrative out on the little wall, that various little walls that we have. So these are the various spaces that we have. So these are the spaces. So the first space that I show, the number 1 photo, is where I would like the wall, as you see, the blank wall between the two door frames, is where I would like to put all our ancestors, but with something that is more emotive rather than just like group photos. The second one is where I would like to put his travel images, like not just the things that he has taken off, not because he traveled to some place, but where it is work related, where he had homes and such. And also in some subtle way, I'd like to show it as a map in the background. The third one is actually where my father-in-law, that is my father-in-law's room, and a big part of his life has been where he lost his first daughter when she was 9 years old. So I would like to dedicate a wall there with her pictures, but I'm not going to write anything about it as of now, because I think it is too much information to bear for a child. So if he questions me, I'm going to say that yes, it is your aunt, but I'm just going to leave it there. The the fourth wall is going to be of both the grandparents, because a large part of my father-in-law's life was about his wife. So age appropriate curation is the strategy that I have used, and also where my father-in-law was a scientist and he really won a lot of awards, so which was a big part of his life. So I'd like to keep them accessible, also because they're metal and they're not going to break, or they're not delicate. So I'm going to keep them in places where he can actually access them and know what these objects are. The challenges that I'm facing here is a lot of narratives do not, they are not the perspective that I have as an adult. I am not able to put it from a child's point of view and tell the story. That is one. And like I said before, many narratives have no visuals or objects. Some are stories, and how do I transform them to something that I can display? Accommodating text on wall panels. The only idea that I can think of is putting this postcard, because it's very simple, but I do not know if there's anything more.
I imagine that you could and you would be sharing things with your son even at this age, where he might be able to have some memory, or at least, sometimes memories, especially very, very early memories, are things that are not real memories, but they're memories that are sort of formed because you've been told this so often. Yes. So, your grandfather used to sit and tell you stories or whatever else. Look, I mean, I know this because my daughter remembers my father little snippets, and she says that some of them are real memories, some of them are because you've told me about it, and some of them are because we have luckily some video recordings of the two of them sort of together. But I think if you want to sort of have your son be continuously sort of connected to his grandfather's life and values, and you want to start it fairly young, for a child who might, maybe when he's, say, 4 or something, or 3.5 or 4, when he might start showing interest, would you be able to create something like a little game? So there is this element of interactive thing for the child, rather than you sitting and saying that, okay, this is what your grandfather did, or things like that. Maybe there is something that incorporates a simple game. Firstly, the reason why we look at people and eulogize them is for something that you want yourself or other people to sort of absorb those values. But it's sometimes, to my mind, when you sort of idolize or eulogize them too much, there's a sort of a reverse reaction. And it's sometimes nicer to say that, okay, that person was human, or he had a weakness, or it could be a weakness for a sweet dish, or a temper, or whatever else. But then they're people that then you want to connect with. These are how epics are also written. The great Greek epics, or the original sort of Indian epics, also allowed a lot of the characters to have weaknesses. So I'm just saying this, that there are different ways of sort of storytelling, and one of the ways is to sort of acknowledge and share as much the achievements as the sort of human aspects of a person, because then especially children will connect to it better.
Yes.
Soumya, are you around?
So the inspiration of this archive basically comes from my quest of my own identity, and that sort of started from myself and my mother looking into into the stories and objects of my great grandmother, and that's how I considered making an archive on her. And I was looking at the things, and through interviews and other conversations with other people, I decided to kind of dedicate a food archive, a culinary archive of sorts, to kind of pay homage to the legacy that she has left, the kind of food with so much happiness and the passion that she showed in cooking and feeding everyone. So I decided to dedicate a small repository of her memories. So the interesting thing about this archive is that the objects are very much the everyday things that we use in a kitchen. Because I think those were my great-grandmother Shantabai Pillaivar's greatest possessions. Yeah, so there are basically three main narratives that I am trying to capture and trying to kind of weave together to make the archive and to kind of put across what the stories. First is the migration, of how the migration happened from Pedapalli, Mantini to Chhattisgarh. How because my great grandmother got married at the age of 10, she did not really spend a lot of time with her maternal side. With her maiden family, she spent most of her life with her husband and her in-laws. So she has she kind of grew with them. The other thing is that the culinary practices that she acquired and she evolved with Marathi cuisine, Chhattisgarhi cuisine, and Telugu cuisine, and how that still is very important to our family, and every member who comes into the family has to kind of adjust to it. And the third one is that something that my great grandmother very religiously did until the very end of her life, which was going to the market every day and just like going and eating around, bringing like mixture and like kulfi sometimes. And even today when we go, like all, she would have been 110 or 108 years old today. But even when we go back to those small businesses and small stores, small enterprises that are still running, they still remember us, they still identify us with her, that we are from her family. So I think that is very interesting to see how those places have remained the same and they still remember her. And the city has grown around, but there are some things in the city that have remained the same, and her essence is still captured, is still present in those places. This is an example of Julia Child's kitchen that was kind of recreated at the Smithsonian Museum in Washington, D.C. So this gave me an idea to sort of how I can bring these elements together. But of course, I cannot bring each of one of them together, put them, and then sort of take a panorama shot and put it like that. But this was very interesting to me because in this format, they have also kind of attached embedded stories related to each object. So it kind of allows you to know what the history behind these objects is, and they make these objects you're able to relate to these objects because you may have similar stories to such things. The challenges that I'm facing is, first of all, weaving all the three narratives together of how I want to put them, because one of them talks about the larger things such as the migration, which is something that a lot of people will be able to relate with. The second is family traditions of food, and the third is the person that she was and what cooking did to her as a person. The other thing is that because the space has changed, it is difficult for me to relate the older space with the newer space, and how I can kind of, make sense of this change and how I can present that change to my family, and still not, because a lot of members of my family cannot relate with the new space. And the third thing is that because these objects are still in use, they're not like, they still serve their utility. They have to be presented in a way that will not sort of hinder what we do with them. Like the pakad and all that she's given to us, we use it every day, so I cannot place it in a exhibition space and make it into an exhibit. So yeah, and AR VR is something that I have not done. So if there is some technology, or if there is some beginner's course or something like that, if I could go around that, and how I could create that effect.
Yeah, my gut says that I don't think you need to sort of immediately start, maybe not use the AR VR at this point, because I think you have enough opportunities to sort of talk about some of the things that you want to without those mediums. So for instance, I quite like the idea of your walk. And I think not just doing it virtually, but say assigning a particular day in a year, collect family members, and it could be something that you do together, along with maybe some sort of recordings of each person's individual memory of having done that with her. The other could be, when you use the objects that are in your that you say are in use, maybe on particular say festival days or something like that. If as a family you sort of have use those objects with a particular dedication or remembrance to her, especially things like that murukku maker or what, and even if they are, I imagine that they're scattered in the kitchen, but if you could mark it in some way, create a mark or an attachment or whatever else that sort of says that this is your great-grandmother's, then every time someone uses it, there is one recognition or a way in which she is remembered, but also there is a sort of sensitivity in when you're using it.
Okay.
And I feel that cupboard that you showed shows immense possibilities of ways in which you can convert that cupboard into a sort of a display and information repository. Either with, you should just completely convert that cupboard into a way in which you can maybe house things or house objects, house stories.
Okay.
Let that be the place, because it's sort of movable and you can decide where the best place for it is. You could even, because it's a small cupboard, you can even suspend it from a wall. But I think even if you have, say, a couple of spaces that are dedicated spaces for objects, memories, photos, stories, then and then have dedicated days, so maybe it's her birthday or a particular festival where she would make a particular dish. Those events and those days can be the sort of anchors that you can use to sort of talk about her and remember her, or create activities that are. So I feel, in my sense, that I feel that you have to sort of take away the primacy of the object in this case, because these are, like you say, they're not objects that you want to keep away, or they are in use.
Right. Because I think one thing that we all agree upon is that she would have wanted us to use the objects.
Yeah, and I think that is so. Then it might be nice while they might be used every day, but on particular days they could be given a little bit more importance. You could create something that's a bit more ceremonial to the way in which commemorate her in some way.
Right.
To give you a background, my archive is about, again, a pure family archive, which spans 5 generations of the family.
Okay.
From the 1890s to the present, in a way.
Wow.
Right? And so I'm based in Bombay, and my family hails from Saurashtra, like the roots are in Saurashtra. So yeah, that's the first slide. So what triggered this is, in the last 2 years, we lost 4 elders in the family. That's my dad, including his 3 siblings. And now the only living member of his generation is one kaka. So I kind of realized that, there's nothing for the future generations if they want to trace back the history or roots of the family. So before my uncles thought like his memory starts fading due to age, I should probably catalog or document this in some way. While I was culling out the few points that I wanted to highlight in the archive, I realized that the word travel is very key in this whole archive. The reason being that the section 1 is about migration of the family from Saurashtra to Bombay, and we were essentially a family of business people, traders. So how the family resettled in the 1940s and eventually after gaining experience with other Gujarati business people started their own business. Um, the second part of it is while we were young in the 70s and 80s, like we are nine cousin brothers and cousin sisters, the family took the entire family at that point of about 50 people. We took three major pilgrimages, one to Kutch, one to Rajasthan, and then Gujarat. What came out of these pilgrimages is a few things. One, it introduced us to our religion in a more fun manner because of the travel and the different places. It also introduced us to the rich culture that India is, the diverse and rich culture. What further happened is we all bonded so much during those three pilgrimages that eventually has become a tradition over the years, which continues to the present, where every single year we take either a pilgrimage together or we earmark one day in the year that the entire family of which is now 100 plus meet together. Now, this again further triggered one more thing, that is, before my grandmom passed away, because she wanted us to continue this tradition, she built a trust fund and she made us promise that we will use part of the funds from there to finance the trip or the get together or whatever. But over the years, that trust has grown so large that all the surplus funds are being used to donate to various charities, NGOs, etc., etc. So that I thought made an interesting story. And travel, the third part of travel relates to my own father, who as a child, because of because of the family financial situation, could not, really live the childhood that he would like to, or as like most children live. So once they established the family business, my father traveled widely abroad. And strangely, he started becoming a collector of things, which was a strange mix of like toys, books, Lego sets, cars, etc., etc. So I want to kind of, how he relived what he missed in childhood in the later dates via his travel. So that's one of the things I want to highlight. Yeah, I mean, one of the things he did during those travels abroad is he unfailingly sent postcards of that place to every family. Like, entire family had postcards of the place he visited. So that became a huge collection. Now, the platform that I'm planning to host this archive is again a digital one. I've come across this app which is called Leaflet, which is very similar to Google Maps. But it's far more intensive. It allows you to play around with images, with text, etc. A lot of things, and it can be interactive. So what you see here is the first two sections will be hosted with a map as the background, which will be an interactive map. And the map that you see here is an actual object which I've inherited from my father. It is a 4 feet by 5 feet foldable, exhaustive, detailed roadmap of India in those days. And the significance is when the pilgrimages were being planned, I remember my uncle and dad and all poring over this large map and with a pencil actually charting out from place to place our whole journey, So I'm going to make it interactive where if you see on the side, I have listed down the places in an order on the right. So plan is the moment someone clicks on, say, the first one, which is Botad, it leads them to another page. Ishita, can we move on to the next slide? Sorry. Yeah. Which will look something like this. So I don't want to make it a very formal archive, but more of a visual story. So it will be peppered throughout with photographs and photographs of objects with text blurbs. So not making it like a detailed story, which is just the text. Yeah, so the first two sections I plan to present in this manner. And my dad's story will be more peppered with the postcards and the objects that I have of his various collections like paperweights, books, cards, Lego sets, etc., etc. So yeah, well, that is the gist. Now, there are two more things that I have planned to do. In my website, I want to keep an open page and invite people, other families from Saurashtra to share their family migration stories. As we know, a huge number of people from Gujarat and Saurashtra sort of migrated to Bombay and other larger cities and set up businesses and trades. So I will initially gather a few stories and then invite people to add their own stories. The second project I'd like to do is come out with a postcard project where physical postcards are being exchanged with little snippets of their family trips, some interesting incidences that have happened during those trips, etc. Where I'm lost. So I have a whole lot of objects which belong to various family members. I don't know where to fit these in because they don't really tie in with the migration or the travel stories, but they are objects which hold importance in a way. So I don't know where to fit this in. The other thing is my main source of information, my kaka, is just not happy giving an interview. He has decided his mode of sharing the information is via handwritten autobiography, and it's written in Gujarati. Now I don't know how to translate that into my digital platform. And yeah, I mean these are my two main question marks. And yeah, of course, I have oral history narratives from my mom, and eventually I'll be interviewing my kaki, which will become the female voice of this entire experience. You know, the female members of the family talking about their experiences. So these three I don't know how to incorporate into this whole archive. I'm at that question mark at this point. Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting how you've told how you plan to take this forward. I think it's quite interesting. And the sort of frameworks that you've got, one the travel, the other sort of the postcards, and keeping it interactive and participative continuously. One thought that I had was that it seems to sort of lend itself more to an app-like format, which is more difficult because you might have to get somebody else to help you do it, I imagine. But the reason why I'm saying is that suppose when you're visiting there and you have all these stories in place, you can continuously update it, or you could sort of make some of those spaces trigger them through geographical indicators. Where, if you are at a particular place, say in Saurashtra, in front of a temple or a chaurasta or somewhere, it'll immediately tell you that these are the sort of archival materials that are related to that space, as an example. It could be a story, it could be a story that gets triggered. I feel that your map idea is very strong and can be used as the framework through which you navigate and see these things, through which you access both stories, objects, people, and they can be triggered in an actual or a virtual travel experience.
Right.
One other thing was you were talking about your grandfather's text in Gujarati. You could possibly ask someone to sort of read it out, and that could be a piece that you could use. I feel the audio in this case will add a quality which is more than sort of written text.
Thanks so much.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, Avantika, over to you.
All right. So Sarita, just to give you a background, I told you that this is a project that I'm trying to do. Oh gosh, sorry.
on my grandfather, and the aim is to figure out who he was and why he was the way he was. And also, I didn't see him because he passed away when I was just a year old. But there's been a strong linkage between personality and him, and I think that's the quest that has sort of got me to this journey of figuring out. And the figuring out has only been done through the other people in his life. For instance, my grandmother and my parents and other relatives or neighbors through whom I've heard about him, or through the house that we've lived in together. So I call this project Dear Grandfather, the Story of Your Absence. The bigger idea is to create a museum in my old house, which was bought by him and was the house in which my father grew up and I grew up later. But for
Where
now,
is this?
this is in Shimla,
Okay.
and the idea right now for this while is that I want to do like a deep immersive storytelling piece where I perform the story through the use of audio. Moving on, the project I feel is more like a, like I told you, immersive storytelling piece where I want to consciously understand what is beneath his life and death. It's an audio essay or more like a performance that would sort of use the visuals and the photographs that I have. I would talk about the objects that have introduced me to him. There are these oral histories that I've collected from his place of birth and people that he's worked with. He was also a writer and a philosopher, so the idea is also to understand what he was trying to write in all his writings and his poetry, in the way he would recite. The idea is to use poetry and stories, audio recordings, oral histories, objects, visuals, but to build a story around all of it, which will link me and him. So for now, I want to create like an immersive storytelling piece, but the long term idea is, like I told you, to create a museum of my old house where I want to have stories around objects, around the furniture that I mentioned, where my grandmother used to sleep and it would shriek, and how I was introduced to my grandfather. So the also there's a history to our own house because it was from the pre-independence era, and there's a lot of history, British history attached to the house. So maybe link that as well. Um, the larger, I was just thinking broadly, whom will it interest? And I think anybody who's interested in like an immersive storytelling piece, it's more like it's just a story. I don't know how much I can say that it's an archive, but I will be using all the archival material that I have. The larger questions that I want to build are around family history, memory, the kind of trauma my grandfather was carrying, and how he passed it on to us. I also understand that he was not a very famous man, or but there's this thing about him where I see like a complete life cycle from what he was to his quest of understanding more about life. And so I thought that will this project, through this particular question, be able to attract larger audience, as in people who are interested in understanding this aspect of how human life works and what are the questions, what are the things that we are after. In just to give you an example, I found this cassette of his. He used to record whatever he would sing. So just So, I mean, there's a longer piece. He sang an entire ghazal, and it also has my grandmother's voice towards the end. So, this is how I plan to use the objects that I have found. Also, there are letters that I have figured out that he wrote. So, on the right, there's this letter from 1988 that he addressed to my mother, and he was writing a book at that point of time. Was in Shimla. So this is the same address where I write him a letter in 2019, where I'm thinking of juxtaposing my own voice of reading what we just heard in the beginning. So how do I link what he wrote to what I write to him at this stage. So juxtaposing both my writing and his writing.
What are the sort of challenges you anticipate, or what are the
There's this, there's this. I've been thinking about it because the story is clear in my head. I know what direction I want to go in. It's just this question: does it make sense? Is it, how do I connect it to a larger audience? Also, I mean, in terms of curating the museum at my place, I think that's also going to be another challenge because the house has also been renovated in a way, but it still has the old structure intact. And, like you mentioned, the beds and the cupboards. And third is, I don't know how to use his writings. I have physical copies of his handwritten poetry and his notes and the foundations that he started. But I don't know what to do with them because they can't be used in the kind of audio essay I want to tell. Maybe I can narrate one or two of those.
I think what you're attempting to do is really beautiful, and I think definitely people outside of your immediate family will relate to it, because after all, we all relate to stories like the Diary of Anne Frank, for instance, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's a story. Yes, there is a sort of harsh reality against which the story is set. But I think what we relate to is not so much that as much as the story of a girl growing up, and try and in some way mirror our own preoccupations, our sort of quests and stuff like that. So I don't think you have to doubt that. I'm very confident, and I'm very sure, especially the way that the form that you're taking will work towards that end. What do you do with the written documents that you might have? One, I do think, yes, of course, digitizing, putting it up, having you or anyone else read it through will give the archival document a fresh lease of life, in a sense. So I think that's there. I definitely think it's worthwhile you're approaching, and I think that's true for anyone in this group, to approach people who will help to protect your old documents. There are lots of people who will help to conserve it and advise you on how to store them. I think is for instance the house that you're talking about, is it being lived in or is it empty?
Now it's empty. We were living in it till a couple of months back, but we moved to another house, so it's empty now.
And you envisage that it will remain so, or
I was thinking that how, in a way that I could also, give it a touch of a museum, but also create like an Airbnb, like, also find ways to sort of monetize, but with the idea that this house has a history and it attracts.
Yeah, I think that's very doable. In fact, I was going to suggest that. Why not have people come and visit? And you just have to be careful that these are people who will be sensitive to the material that is around, and would be interested to live in a place that was once lived in by a person, like you say, an ordinary human being, but who had all the sort of regular angst that as human beings we have. The conversation around it alive.
Just this last question, that as a curator, I mean, looking at the kind of work that you've done, would audio essay also be your choice? Even hearing, just the sample that I had.
I think definitely so, and I think you could, while you speak it out very well, just to get more variety, it might be worthwhile to get other people also to add to it.
All right, Niharika?
Yeah. Hi. Hi. All right. So this archive is basically a personal family archive it began with becoming an archive for Pandit Brijbhushan Kabra, who was a Hindustani classical musician and my grandfather-in-law. He passed away 2 years ago, so I didn't have a chance to get to know him. So in a sense, this archive began as a search for this man that, is a part of our everyday conversations, and, his objects and his guitar and his music is all around us in the house in Ahmedabad. But I didn't get a chance to meet him. But over time, it also uh, emerged that Dadi's story, his wife, Dadi, Kamala Kabra, uh, who is a glass artist and an artist in her own right. There are stories from her life and their travels together and their life together that emerged. So right now it looks something like this. What I imagine the archive, uh, there might be three kind of people who might have possible engagements with the archive: family, relatives, close acquaintances who knew Daddu and who knew his music and the man that he was. Also, separately, there could be Hindustani classical music aficionados, especially people around Ahmedabad, the circles of Saptak and other parts of India who have connections to the slide guitar and this form of music. And apart from that, textile and art enthusiasts, because Dadi has developed a style of glass mosaic, glass art, which I'll show you images of. And also, she's a master embroiderer. If you see this image on the top, all of these kurtas were hand embroidered by Dadi for Daddu to wear at his concert recordings and album covers, and they've survived over the last 50 years. Um, so in a sense, I began with a large chunk, but now I believe that the archive could be split into three different parts or three different sections. And the part that could be relatable most to the family is what was Daddu like as a family man and as a person, as a writer. So this part will deal with habits, everyday life, struggles, his journey from discovering a guitar in a shop in Bombay to actually converting it into a Hindustani classical instrument, so that he could play the guitar while he was just about 20 or so. So this part deals with that, and I imagine this to be a more crowdsourced digital portal where a part of the information, anecdotes could be sourced from people who want to share about Daddu, his habits, who he was as a person, um stories around him, and some part of it could be through research and through oral history recordings with Dadi and other members of the family, which I have initiated. The other part, which is the Hindustani classical music, which relates to the Hindustani classical music, um, I thought this could be a more fact-based section, which deals with more of the back-end sort of cataloging of his music, how the music was produced, in what kind of studios, and also mainly the anatomy of the guitar. How did he, sort of insert the bridge onto the guitar and modify it with a metallic band? And how did he produce the first slide guitar? Also relating it to the shop in Calcutta, which now mass manufactures it. So those kind of very specific music related facts, which could be accessible to somebody who asks for it. So it's not necessarily an open archive or an open document. For the third part of Dadi's section, I recently published an article on this lace crimper. If you can see, it's this century old lace crimper that Dadi got from her grandmother in Rajasthan, and it's this almost this obscure object of wonder, and it's made of brass. And I imagine this section to be something similar to the Museum of Material Memory portal. Yeah, this is something that I have started doing with Dadi, recording conversations with her. And sometimes it's difficult to sort of compress and distill everything, because the conversation sort of is born out of nowhere. It's on the dinner table often, and sometimes around tea. All these three sections were going to come together in a tangible way through a postcard project. So I imagined that I would be illustrating stories from Daddu and Dadi's life and larger family life, also with some pictures of their instruments, the art, kurtas, things like that. And this could be sent out as a set of postcards to the extended family as well as whoever is interested in them. But then after having conversations with the family, I realized that not everybody is as fascinated with postcards as I am, and not everybody might want to hold on to a piece of paper and also take the effort of forwarding it. So I wanted to, I was struggling with whether this is cohesive and how to make this more sort of well-rounded rather than making it look broken up in these three parts.
Yeah, I think it's sort of it's very varied.
Yeah.
Audiences.
Right.
And also very focused, because someone who's into the music and who might be aware of it would be a very specialized audience. Art is again a very, very specialized sort of audience. So I wonder how you could possibly do one thing that would address all three.
Yeah.
It's very, I think, an ambitious and not even a advisable approach to follow.
Right.
So I sort of see them as completely different, steps in all together. And I don't, while there might be a bit of overlap for one or the other, and therefore I think it might be better to treat them separately.
Right.
And therefore have very clear agendas and outcomes for them separately.
Right.
Because sometimes when you try and satisfy everything, we out.
So one could be a blog, one of them is a social media page, and the other one is a backend repository or like a documentation, which can be accessed upon request. Do you think that makes sense as of now?
Yeah, so I imagine that the blog is more of a sort of for the family.
Yes.
Yeah, and the social media page, I think,
is for daddies.
For a wide, for wider audiences. Because I find the music one of curiosity, because when you, especially when you talked about the guitar and its connection to the album cover and the music from it, all that, great connection I see.
Thank you.
Shobna, are you there?
Hi, Sarita. So it's basically, I'll just start with initially started up. It had to do with my experience in finding lacuna in what is available in terms of queer literature. I started off collating information and things like that. Then about 10 years ago, I set up Queer Inc. We sort of to collate information on one platform. And then over the years, became a retailer. Then people started saying they need Indian content. So I became publisher, then, short film producer. And then during this lockdown, and in the meantime, as part of our anthologies, I sort of had a lot of chats with the people who organized the first Pride in India, which was back in, I think, 1999 in Calcutta. So there's a lot of information there. And right, I think that's the end of it. The thing is, I've started this. So when I started looking at people's experiences and and trying to figure out what sort of themes to give to anthologies and things, and obviously there is this lack of information about women. And I started several. One of the group, I used to do a lot of crisis intervention in Bombay for women, LGBT people, and then I also had a group. I started a group as well, and all those things. But everything was hidden. Nothing was visible. So as part of the Asho Ishita's course, I thought, let me just do this. And then I started off trying to put women's stories on paper or trying to get it. But what has happened is, as I talk to people, they are reluctant to put a face on anywhere visible. And also, but they are willing to tell their stories within the same framework, move from where they were born to exploring their sexuality, where they are now. in relationship away from the family. So very, very brief. So that's why I've marked it stage 1 at this point in time. One of the things is when we started this course, we talked a lot about objects. Now, women don't have objects of desire. They don't. I mean, I have anthologies. I have a book, for example, which is the first book I ever read back in 1995. But women in India at this point in time, I've spoken to people who are 74, in their 30s, in their 40s. They say, for example, Debonair magazine, I don't know if you probably might remember it, it had actors in it, or female actors in it, which is where they first noticed that they were different, or first noticed the woman's body and liked it. And some people said there's a movie called Zuban or something like that, where Zeenat Aman comes up from the ocean in a bikini.
Yeah.
And that has excited a lot of women. I don't know how to get all these pictures. I'm sure it's available somewhere, but when the stories are told to me, this is what the descriptions I get. Now it's up to me to find those. And I looked for Debonair. I haven't been able to find, a digital or it being archived digitally. So I might have to do like a wider crowdsourcing project to do that. So basically, from a bigger dream, it's just come down to this mapping thing now.
Okay.
And collecting some information. I've also told the women that this is part 1 of the interview, that I'll come back to you to interview later as they get comfortable, or as I get comfortable putting the information out there. So that's what I'm at this point in time, and I'm not struggling with that and seeing. And the other struggle is trying to find an appropriate software to handle what I'm doing right now and be capable of handling other information, which will include people's stories in stages, in audio, text, video, images, plus the accessibility levels as well. So that's basically, and in scaling back the project, I think I still haven't a concrete idea of what will go there.
So I think there's definitely value in what you're sort of doing, especially if there's a focus. What I wanted to ask you is that is your intention, like you said, the intention is to be a platform which shares stories of women for younger women, right?
Yeah.
And women who are women.
Yeah. Sorry. So what has happened also, my experience with working with women, is that the sense of role model is missing. So people are always recreating the wheel as to how to live as a queer woman in India. There's people who have access to the internet, but I've also met people, 23-year-old women who live in Bombay, have no internet to access because they live in, very conservative households.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think there's some value with that sort of an action of stories, even if they have some historical nature or archival nature of sorts. But I'm trying to figure out whether eventually what you want to do, is it like a portal? Is it something that would collate stories with contributors, or are you going to curate them after your interviews? Those are sort of questions.
Right. I think it might end up being a portal the way things are going. There's just a lot of information coming with the caveat that they don't want to be recognized out there, because this is like
today there is a good amount of people who have no discomfort with being recognized as well, right?
Yeah, that is there. That's the younger crowd. That's the crowd who sort of moved out of home, and they want to be represented as well, but they can't be. Yeah, so it's a very fine line I'm sort of treading at the moment.
Okay.
How to represent?
I think definitely sort of stories would be good. The other thing is to sort of follow semi-fictionalized formats. Yeah, so you kind of draw from real life, but take a little bit of a liberty. and create sort of stories around those. And that would allow you to keep some amount of the anonymity in place. Yeah, because I think that would give you this sort of ability to speak of stories that might require anonymity, but still are relevant stories in themselves. Just the knowledge that they are based on true lives is in itself has some sort of value for those who you want to address. It's like in adoption, you might adopt and you keep certain records on the surface, and some records you have to sort of go through certain stages to access.
Right. Yeah.
Saman, you can go on.
Hi, Sarita. Thank you for the session. So, just want to quickly introduce with the project I am working. I don't know why it is moving. This was an academic project which I started as my postgraduate thesis, which now became a personal project, and then I'm also pitching it to the Scindia Museum in Gwalior. Project is looking at archival material of the city Gwalior from the time between 1870 to 1940, which was during the princely history of the city. The city also has a layered past to it. The idea is to pull out different narratives and stories that reflects the story of the city. That is what I'm trying to put together through the archival material I had collected during the course of my project. And then once I moved ahead, I also understood larger context to the material which I have collected. This is the kind of material which the project has, right? These are the numbers for different materials which I have with me right now. Most of the material is in open source, and some of the material I have accessed during my project from the museum. So for each of the material, there are certain story anchors that then become a sequenced narrative in order to tell the story of the city, or in order to tell the layered past of the city, so to say. These are the thematic underlines which I want to work with. That is city life, city politics, the spatial changes in the city. So there are also the types of materials are photographs, cartographic records, books and buildings, print media, newsletters, and official records. Now, detailing out how each material fits into categories in terms of what stories they will each of the material will tell. So this is what I've outlined in this slide. And thematic underlining the largely narratives and nostalgia which is related to the city. So for buildings, I'm looking at smaller facts and when was it made, and what are the memories associated with each of the building. And then there are archival photographs, which what are the stories, when was it taken, how did it change the perspective of the city, things like that. Also, then there's this very preliminary sort of thing which I have done, which is talking about what are the development phases, what I've done till now, what is yet to left. So it is now there is still narrative building which is happening as to how the story would be told in terms of the patterns which are emerging from the archival material. And how do I visualize and how do I link it and then exhibit it onto a digital platform? The digital platform is a website, and the website would be largely linear in terms of the timeline, which is from 1870 to 1940. It might extend later, but for the starting for the website to go up, this is the timeline I'm looking at, considering I have a fair understanding of what are the things that are happening in the city during the time period. So it becomes largely a visual repository and not text heavy. And then the material is also linked to an Instagram account, which is not linear, but it pulls out materials from the website. And largely there are these sample representations of what material would look like, and what are the things that I want to tell about the material. So this is a picture from a very famous central square in the city. which is called Jayaji Chowk. This is a central commemorative statue which is in the city, and this is a photograph of inauguration of the statue of the then ruler. So these are smaller facts about what is happening in the picture, when was it made, and also certain extracts which I've pulled out from the book, which is talking about the space itself. Secondly, there's other thing which is again a sample representation of what I'm trying to do with the cartographic records. I have around 16 of them, but I've chosen 3 of them to redraw or represent in a manner which can be interpreted, and some story can come about it. So this was a map which is around the 1940s map of Gwalior, which I've color corrected and then redrawn. So this allows one to understand what are the important buildings, what are the spatial changes in the city, and so on. So this is where the project is. My questions are, there is a lack of cohesiveness in this sort of narrative building for the project, considering the amount of material I have till now. So that is one thing. Also, the since I'm using the data from the open source, there are a lot of stakeholders, a lot of sources I'm referring to. So how do you deal with that?
The question I kind of have is, again, I'm not totally clear as to who your specific audience is.
Yeah, so I am looking. The website is for the people who are city enthusiasts, and can later become some repository for people who want to look at the urban history of a city. So that's a later part, but initially it would become a visual repository for people who want to know about the city's history. And also, I am imagining this to become a pitch to the museum in terms of that, okay, this is the material, I can collate it for you. And then there are places in museum where you can exhibit it.
Yeah, so I imagine that the website would be the first sort of stage towards the end.
Yeah.
So, and I think if you go back to your slide where you've broken it up into sort of city stories, so you can look at the city in various lenses, right? Through various lenses.
Right.
And each of us would be looking at a city through its various lenses. As someone with an architectural background, you may be drawn to how the city, parts of the city have changed their usage from, being semi-agricultural to sort of other uses, or marketplaces becoming something else and stuff like that. But there might be another lens which is looking at the city from the point of view of its rulers, and Gwalior has interesting stories, if I remember my history correctly, in terms of the sort of people who were involved in its governance. So, and then there are sort of architectural sites themselves which are of interest in the city, which then have its stories. And I think there's a strong music tradition as well.
Right. Which I haven't started to look at, because that's a very different tangent altogether, but might get added in terms of, because there's a larger repository of music tradition and gharanas available in one.
Exactly. So if you look at all that, there's so much actually that's there. So the one way you could sort of start doing it is to create a framework which allows for all these different narratives to be put into place.
Yeah.
They could be oriented according to the sort of interests of potential visitors to the site. As I said, someone with an architectural interest, someone with music, someone historical, someone with sort of ideas on the city and its governance. So, and then when you do pitch it to the museum, you could sort of concentrate on one or two aspects that could link it to aspects within the museum.
Right.
Whether it is, an object-related connection, like a connection to an object that's in the museum and also links to this, or the map as an object itself can be something that you could connect to your museum, to something at the museum, for instance. But given that your study is of the city at large, you should at least have the framework in place for everything.
So Mavish, over to you.
Hi, this is Mehvish. I am from Pakistan. So my project, the title is right at the top. It's about decolonizing home through objects, and the diagram sort of explains my whole process, which I've gone through during this workshop. It talks about the methodology that I'm sort of trying to, which I also experiment with in my art practice, and I sort of look into qualitative methods or ethnographical methods, and for documentation. And if I am trying, if I would, I have envisioned the whole archiving project to be exhibited, and I sort of term it as manipulating the ethnographical field. So this is a complete process which I had in my mind while I was chalking down this project, and I've come across to this point that where it could be exhibited in my own personal space, and I live with my in-laws, and it could be turned into a research paper, the whole thing, after I have done the basic first part of it. And after the exhibit, I will be sort of writing about it. It could be a part of a book, or a zine, or a research paper, something like that. And then it's because I have a number of objects, so the process will repeat itself. The process of the archiving has been in detail for me, because I in my studio also practice restoring old furniture pieces, and that is how I sort of ventured into this whole idea alongside. I'll just the end user, if I briefly let you know about that, the end user is my family, the future generations, people of Pakistan. But definitely it has a very academic and a very studio based or an architecture or artist based methodology attached to it. If I just quickly sort of talk about the type of objects that I have, that's furniture, that's silverware, then there is jewelry, serveware, then there are some used weaponry also. Then there are a lot of images and a lot of photographs, which is of post-conflict architecture that had begun after 1947, and then 1965 war, and then goes up to 1971 war. Since I am restoring these objects, so there will be a lot of sketches, glimpses of some of my sketches that you will see. Now, this is again a mood board situation where I'm dealing with a couple of important texts for the idea of migration, conflict, decolonization, wretched of the earth. I'm sure everyone's aware of this writing piece. So, and then there are some creations, how text and then text-based art is created. So I was just trying to venture into that. How does that work for me with the objects? And this is the range. These are not only these are the objects, but this is just to give you a glimpse of an idea that I'm dealing with furniture, and these are all personal objects. Nothing is this is all what belongs to the family.
Yeah.
Okay.
What are the sort of concerns you have?
So my major concern, because I am actually strictly focused to the idea of actually making it as a smaller portion of what I'd be doing in my PhD, which is focused in architectural history. But I do believe that these objects played a larger role in recreating or decolonizing homes after partition.
Yeah.
So firstly, what makes sense to me is to actually display these pieces, because I've just recently finished restoring most of them.
Yeah.
So first, actually, just creating a smaller exhibit for them. And since I talk about this whole manipulating the ethnographical field, like bringing on people, people whom these pieces belongs to, so that they could interact with these pieces. They could hear their own relatives' stories about it. They could relive that whole idea. So I do feel that that is the first step that I should do, and then sort of theorize it later. Yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think the glasses, the chairs, and the bureau, or I don't know what you'd call it. Yeah. There are others as well. But even if you sort of choose 3 of them, I feel, and create a mini exhibit of them, and and but under the themes that you've looked at, whether it is themes of love and loss, or other stories that you can link them to. I feel they then will offer the way for you to look at it against a sort of an critical reading or an academic reading of sorts. How certain objects then become symbolic of uh, of a theme, or of an emotion itself. I find the one that you shared, the last, the one of the 2 glasses, extremely poignant and relatable in a lot of ways, because there is, the fact that 2 of them are separated against the backdrop. It's a very, very strong story.
And what do you think about what do you think about the sort of, it's just a thought that, whether decolonization has been decolonized in curation, whether we have, or we're just taking the, some Angrez ka, silsila, and we're just talking about that again and again, again and again, rather than talking about actually understanding that, does it have violence, does it doesn't have violence, or these kind of questions, or maybe curation cannot be just done in a white box.
Yeah, I mean, I think the values and the sort of emotions that these objects create are, while they're against the backdrop of sort of a decolonized world that happened, and they are sort of the vehicles in a sense of that, it cuts across different sorts of barriers of yahan ka ya wahan ka. There's not, it cuts across all that, because especially if you relate them to themes that are universal, universal in terms of sort of loss or memory or nostalgia, or why is it that they act, I mean, they have the power to act as triggers for more universal values. Yeah.
All right, thank you.
I hope that helps. Yeah.
And Johan, you need me to start the
yes, please.
Presentation, right?
Maybe
okay.
Start with a little introduction as well, how it has come into shape. So actually, I don't come from a background of typography or design, so I'm a bit intimidated presenting it to you, coming from long years of working with design. But also the original concept was my focus on ephemera and the idea of like different records and articles that have a very short lifespan. So I think I kind of got acquainted with this collection through my involvement or my acquaintance with the Akuru Collective, which is a design and typography institute in Colombo. It's quite young. Some of the collections, looking at it from an archival theory perspective, were already recorded and archived by some of the presses themselves. So this idea of what is ephemera and what isn't. Sorry, there's a bit of sun behind me. So that was a little blurry. So then I thought also with Ishita's recommendation to focus on the typography and printing aspect. Because when you look at the collection, although it's very simple kind of papers and invitations and letters, there are so many different angles you can go into it. You can go into it from a typography angle, from a design perspective, but also, I mean, I'm trained as a sociologist, so I'm looking at them as the social life of objects and the connections to like the funerals, the wedding invitations, and how the act of sending postcards could be kind of brought into this. So the cultural context of this object is what my main interest was. But of course, since this is focusing on typography, I also need to get acquainted with the language, with the resources and bibliography of this language as well. So given that context, maybe I can move to the next slide. And my focus is also on the Sinhala language so far, because that is, although it is the main language and there's been a lot of identity politics associated with it, there hasn't been many initiatives to look at it from an archiving standpoint. So just a very brief idea to say that the idea of the archive came in to fill a void of systematic archival approaches, and this intersection between religion, politics, trade, colonization have all played into the history of printing presses and printing and typography, which is not new to Sri Lanka, but I'm looking at it from that kind of angle. And my hope is to capture these rich narrative histories associated with the material that we have been digitizing throughout the past few months, which include, among many things, funeral posters, invitations, postcards, bills, and I'm also interested in doing this mapping exercise of the printing presses, which I think would be quite a cool exercise to maybe take a particular period, maybe from 18th to 19th century, or like only the 19th century. Just a few brief ideas on like navigation. I was very struck by the letterpress rack. I think some people are familiar with it, and I like the rectangular. This is just ideas that are coming across to me, and how that could maybe infer navigating the space. So I just gave a brief example. Not all of these values are accurate, just to say what is in the archive. So I would look at whose collection is it, like the provenance of this record, what method would it be? Would it be letterpress, or would it be lithograph, etc.? The discipline of it, material, typeface, description. This is what I was explaining, because there are about 3 or 4 different types in this one post itself. So how would you describe it, and what would be a fun and creative way to look at it? It would be a bit boring if you have to just read the description here, but if there's a way of maybe hovering the mouse over the font and you see like a description there, or it would be kind of cool to explore that area. Date of creation is a bit hard to ascertain. there's the year of the death, which is maybe the closest date towards the creation. Then also looking at condition, because as archivists, we want to also pay respect to the particular conditions of the present material and how we preserve it over the years. Looking at the text that's there, the translation and associated people and places. Yeah, this is just a collection of some of the postcards that we have. And these are handwritten typography specimens. And also they have like Jataka stories. Even taking a map that was printed during that time. And if there's a way of kind of mapping the spread of printing presses during that time. This is a later step in the process, but I would like to see. As I mentioned earlier, I originally came from an ephemera background of the archive, but now moving towards more typography and the cultural context of them. Yeah, so any advice from you looking forward to?
Just to sort of understand your project is sort of focused on ephemera and the typography that's associated with print ephemera of a particular period, right?
Yes, it's also it was based on the collection that was with the Akuru Collective. So basically focusing on what we have now, and maybe later drawing on what other collections come to us.
So right now they're from the collections of, sorry, could you repeat?
They are from one or two printing presses, which date from the 80s to the 2000s.
And they are right now housed where?
In the Typography Museum in Colombo. So they've been digitized.
Yeah. So you have access to sort of a collection of typography, which is from a couple of printing presses.
Yes.
And you can, and they're obviously got a particular time period, because the print press sort of function during a particular time period, I imagine.
So some of the records that we have are from the, I think, 80s to the early 2000s, I think, when they were phasing out.
Okay, and they're no longer in existence?
No. So
are no longer in existence.
Actually, they bought over. So my colleague bought the wooden blocks, and also the person was able to donate the samples. So I think it was part of their practice that they keep one sample of everything they
printed out.
Yeah, they printed. So in a sense, he had already collected an archive. So
yeah, that's what I wanted to know. So why I was sort of asking you very specific questions is to sort of find out whether the collection is already there, and then now your job is to sort of, or your interest is to convert them into a manner that they would be accessible and of interest to X type of people. So of course, from, I mean, you know, someone like me who loves letter forms would be interested in it in any way. But how would you make it accessible and of interest to people outside of that? And then, therefore, your role as a sociologist in terms of sort of looking at it from what was the object's role, social, what, you know, social life of objects or whatever, you know, what was its role really? You know, what did that piece of ephemera do? Where did it live? You know, once it left the printing press, what was its role? Would be of interest. You know, was it used as a sort of a sticker on a wall? Was it used as a sort of flyer? Was it posted? And then, you know, like what Ishita is saying, if you sort of then look at it from the material perspective, what paper it's used on, what, I think if you look at it from that lens, it might lend itself to another way of reading the object, and therefore of being read by potentially other users, other readers, or other viewers. And then what is the nature of those, and what's the sort of milieu against which they were used? That would, that lens, I think, could be of curiosity. One other possibility is to see how you could engage with this content today. Because, for instance, I know that in India, I mean, I'm sometimes very critical of it, and I've written about that in my paper as well. A lot of young Indian designers, fresh out of college, like to refer to the type that's used in truck graphics, and then they sort of recreate it or use it for different purposes. So it might be interesting to see how today there is a relevance for this typography. You know, I do think that display physically, other than a sort of digital display, would be of great value in some way or the other. How you put it up, how does this ephemera create more ephemera? You know, that might be an interesting connection, and to see how to, I mean, my interest has always been to sort of how to make the archives alive, and relevant. So that's a question you could ask.
Anjali, are you around, and will you be able to connect? Okay.
So basically, my project is a part of a larger project. The idea is that there are existing institutional collections at the organization that I work at, which is called Keystone Foundation. It's in the Nilgiris. And what I propose to do is to create an exhibition where you can where you can be taken through the concept of Nilgiris Biosphere Reserve through about 50 objects. Now, I want to title it Histories as Sites of Conversations because of the very root word of history, which comes from historio, which means to converse. But more and more, it seems like Nilgiri histories are in the written medium, and they're mostly inaccessible to people of the Nilgiris. And so the entire intention of creating this kind of an exhibition would be to keep it as local and contextual and as conversational as possible, especially through material cultures. Just a small slide about a brief introduction and background about the context in which this exhibition I want to be building. The Nilgiris Biosphere Reserve is sort of at a tri-junction between Karnataka, Kerala and Tamil Nadu. Not only are 3 main languages spoken, but there are almost 22 plus indigenous languages that are spoken over here. And there are many, many indigenous communities, migrants, settlers, etc. Keystone Foundation has been working here for more than 27 years and they've covered different areas of work. But recently they started something called the People and Nature Center, which imagines itself to be kind of a living archive and repository. And this would facilitate a lot of the knowledge transmission within and outside the Nilgiris, at least for work that has been created through Keystone Foundation, through the communities that we interact with, etc. I work within the People and Nature Center and as an archivist, and I'm part of developing multiple components within the People and Nature Center, although through the Constructing Personal Archives project, I propose to be creating an exhibition for the People and Nature Center itself. The idea is to create these local artifacts into story triggers and narrative triggers. The idea is also to involve a lot of youth and young schools and colleges and other interested people from the neighboring areas, neighboring towns, villages, etc. These could be tribal and non-tribal people, and to initiate them into participatory ways of looking at the space of history and how history is not about inaccessibility of materials, it's more about how you want to tell your stories. We want to encourage stories and retellings in local languages. We want to keep it as low cost and low infrastructure as possible, keeping in mind that usually technological access is limited in the Nilgiris in terms of internet connectivity and even access to smartphone technology. So it has to be something that's very modular, very flexible and very transportable. Again, for the sake of the group, I just wanted to say that we're not going to focus too much on the infrastructure of the exhibition building. Instead, we're going to focus on how to do annotations through multiple sources. So the whole idea of annotations is that not only people who have been directly involved with the materials, but also people like who have had other research interests in the Nilgiris should be able to annotate. So this is just again. Oh, so I want to also take you now, the next few slides will be to take you through ways in which we can create this exhibition. So for me, there are a few large entry points into the archive which have helped. So the archive is very large. It's materials of more than 27 years. But in terms of categorizing and classifying it, a thematic timeline of materials at the Keystone Foundation Institutional Repository could be that earliest work used to focus on a lot of eco-development initiatives like conservation and livelihoods and enterprise. Eventually, that the whole focus shifted more into culture and people. That's when a lot of Adivasi groups started getting involved. Eventually, by about 2011 onwards, they had active and robust community media units like a Radio Kotagiri. There's also a community newsletter called Simai Sudhi. There are active beekeeping initiatives. I think the point of having a timeline like this is also for us as collaborative participants while the exhibition is being built to be able to make sure that we're not missing out any major time period within the exhibition. I'm also just taking you through a few kinds of item types and multimedia items to give you examples of the kind of things that we can use. Another way to curate the materials would be to look at the artifacts and materials through thematic lenses. Another way to look at artifacts and materials through thematic lenses would be to look at some of the program components, like beekeeping being a program component has gone through several kinds of revisions and technologies. Now we have a lot of beekeeping fences which are electric, but earlier they used to make this in a very rudimentary way. Another way to curate our exhibition could be through looking at materials and where exactly communities are involved. So like I've just put together a collage, but in the collage you see a lot of important non-timber forest produce that is being dealt with. The last but not the least way of looking and curating some of this material is also looking at materials for some of their research and historic value. For example, on the left, the site that you see is actually an old temple of the Kota community. However, this particular temple is now part of the Kotagiri Urban Town Center. The Kotas still get customary access to it on on a particular period in the year, but otherwise it's meant for public use. Now, the entire significance of that particular sacred site is only recorded in some of these British journals and articles, and maybe we could also use these materials like old photographs and old books as conversation starters to talk about new identities and new histories that got created.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just curious as to, I mean, there's a huge amount of sort of material that you have that you can access, I can see, to create an entire museum. I mean, floors of a museum, if you ask me. But like you say, you might not have all the space in the world, the budget to make it happen. I think primarily, if your audience is going to be the community, then I think that should be the way to make a decision on the way forward.
Concern is also about how, as much as I want to make it participatory, I think the archivist's bias is always going to seep into the whole appraisal and selection process during curation.
So why not have a workshop with the community to try and sort of see what are the aspects that they feel are worth memorializing or in some way would be of value to them? Why ask? I mean, I seriously think, why ask people like us as to what the decisions are? I think you should sort of have a workshop, and this has been done. I mean, I remember last year or a year back, we had a workshop with the with Kalakshetra about the sari, and sort of where the weavers sort of spoke about issues that they had in terms of sort of the material or the sort of the process and the issues that were there, and they spoke of core issues. So why not start with saying that this is what we have, but you as a community, what is it that you want to memorialize or leave for further generations or want to speak to the world about? You know, it might be that they want the museum or whatever, the archive, for future generations within their community, but it also might be the sort of face that they want.
More than the outsider bias, I think my concern is about the archivist's bias, where, you know, I'm fixating on every small thing and
even there, I would recommend you go back to the community and sort of look at ways of storytelling as a means to spread the content together. So, you know, because I'm from Kerala, and I can imagine that certain things would be similar there, where there are stories around objects themselves. So if you can sort of thread the curatorial storytelling in a manner that threads these stories to the community's traditions, to the community's objects, to the community sort of festivals, whatever else, if you can sort of thread it in some way.
So Avni and Tana, do you guys want to take it?
Okay. So to give you a brief introduction on the project. So this is about Patni family hailing from Bhavnagar, and this started with my great-grandfather, Sir Prabhashankar Patni's archives. He used to be the Diwan of Bhavnagar in the early 20th century, and he also held other key administrative positions in the British rule. He was knighted, and there were various other reforms that he brought about in the Bhavnagar princely state. So so we have a family trust which has been running for more than 25 years now, and there are various charitable activities which are done under it to commemorate his ideals and teachings, etc. When I got involved in the trust and started looking at some of his translations, which we wanted to get Gujarati books translated into English, because the current generation in our family, we are not so well versed with the local language, and we prefer to have books in English. And I started approaching people in the academia community, the family, and what emerged was that if I eventually wanted to take his the narratives from his lifetime and the stories of Bhavnagar of that era to the classroom, then we had to look at much more material. And that is how it spiraled into looking at a lot of papers and a lot of other collections that we had back at the ancestral home. And that is when Tana and I got introduced, and we started looking at the papers, his personal library, and a lot of the archives. And we started it with Prabha Shankar Patni, and when we started looking at the collection, taking oral histories around the family, we realized that it's not limited to one person, and then the narratives would go down to the next two generations as well. So while Prabha Shankar Patni is the family luminary who was the Divan and then the member of Governor Council, also the ladies of the family bring in a lot of other aspects to how they managed the things at the community level and how they brought forth the traditions. And these are all coming out from the oral histories that I have been doing so far. And then also his two sons who were involved in administration, like Anant Rai was the next Diwan of Bhavnagar and was the member of Constituent Assembly. He also encouraged a lot of other social activities in the state back then, and his younger son who was involved in administration of other princely states like Porbandar, Lingdi, etc. When we started looking at the archives, then it became apparent that if we wanted to become a platform for research studies and make it available for the larger community to take things to the universities and institutions, then it would make sense to make it a family archive where we talk about where we bring narratives and material from 3 generations, and eventually make it a platform where there can be various studies that can be conducted and a platform for community exchange. So the key features of this archive are that we have roughly 1 lakh of documents that are lying with us, and most of them date back to late 19th and early 20th century. Most of the papers would be at least more than 60 years old, and some of them up to 100 years old. A lot of them are in the very fragile state, which need immediate conservation. So basically, this is we're talking about cross-generational history here, and various scales of knowledge systems from community to regional to international things. So this is how maybe our website would eventually look like, where we talk about the archives and the charter with details about the trust, and then we would have a page on latest updates, where then there'd be other things like the exhibitions that we host or other seminars and collaborations we would look forward to having, to keeping it active and not a stagnant archive. Then there would, of course, be a page on life and times of Sir Prabha Shankar Patni. So it would cover the personal aspects of his life and early life, marriage, where we would then weave in stories about Lady Patni. And there would be a different page covering about his work life as Diwan administrator. He had also penned down several poetries and books. So that collection would also figure here, where we would put up his books as well as some of the handwritten poetries that we found in the archival collection. So now the way forward, also calling out some of our challenges. Since it is such a large scale, we are looking at formalizing the archives and institutionalizing them. And then we need to catalog, digitize, and conserve the whole lot of material that we have. So organizing it is going to take a lot of resources and funding both. oral histories from family, which is a priority currently, and then we would go on to other oral history recordings as well. Launching the portal for archives, we look at the end user would, one is of course the Patni family, but then the larger end user is the academia, the researchers and historians that we want to reach out to. And then have a portal, maybe like Ishita was suggesting, that we could use something like Omeka, which we will now explore to see if it suits our needs to have a portal with the catalog at the back end and identify what works best for our model. Our immediate other goal is also to identify collaborators and patrons and raise funds locally, as well as look for grants and other support nationally, internationally. And then, of course, create visibility of this initiative to get the necessary support. So the family history, where we're bringing in the next generations and where we're talking about, there'll be a lot of personal stories as well. And then on the other hand, we're talking about laying out material for studies and cultural studies, etc. So how to integrate that on the web when we put up things on the website portal is what I think is not very clear at this point for me.
Yeah, I think one way, of course, is to sort of have a website like sort of format, which allows you to speak of the larger family history. You know, so for instance, Sir Patni, his immediate sort of his role in history. Future generations, where they are and things like that. Present it like, I mean, it could, of course, follow a few different formats. It could have a timeline. It could be a series, a slideshow, or a short film, or whatever else, which tells that story. So there is an interest in why these archives are rich. So if you sort of dip into a few of the sort of attractive bits in the archives, in that the front-facing thing, and then keep the sort of bulk of it as data, then I think you will be able to get to your goal of, one, getting other people interested.
I think the other challenges, of course, the scale of the work. So like we've started it with just the two of us doing this, and of course me as the only single family member. So we'll have to institutionalize a team and get those resources in place. So it's a whole lot of work for us.
Yeah, I think that for that, like you say, you don't need to have the physical archives, physical objects and archives in one place. You can sort of donate some of them to other organizations while keeping sort of records in one place. In whatever way, whether they're scanned, digitized, sort of tagged, and all that with accession numbers, but actual physical ones, if you keep them in storage or in safety with other organizations.
Aarti, Vishwe?
So this is, selected works. We are trying to put together an archive of the body of work done by the late architect Pradeep Sachdeva. He has a practice in Delhi, which goes back to almost 30 years plus. Yeah, so the whole idea, the PSDA archives is a whole is a repository of the design practice of Pradeep Sachdeva, and the body of work that he has done, especially in designing hotels, institutions, public spaces, streets, which are done across the country. They play a very important role in the development of the related design practices in the country, some of it also morphing into policies in various organizations. Yeah. So the idea is for this exhibition, for the material, the PSDA archives, to be the to be available to students, designers, and researchers. And the main body of the material is in the form of drawings, documents, also some image, some photographs, and as well as some print media. So this is the sort of material we were dealing with. The intention is to start with an exhibition, which is what we are calling the Encounters with an Architect, and it is this exhibition with which the intention is to launch the PSDA archive. So if you see this table, it is kind of showing our process of what we plan to do, starting with the planning and training part of it till January. And as you can see the table, then to go ahead with the archive prototyping and testing and collecting of the materials, and hopefully by June, July of next year, if everything fares well, etc., with the situation, is when we wanted to kind of do this exhibition. So the exhibition we were planning to hold in this space that we have, which is the PSDA Studios. We have a space over there. It is in Ayanagar in Delhi, and hopefully we would intend for this exhibition to travel over the country. Now, each section will have different parts of it. So each of the sections we kind of broadly divided into these 6 categories, which is, if you can see, one is the studio, then one is the crafts heart, the Indian street, gardens, and make hotels with the space, and building institutions. So from each of these categories and sections, we have taken up a key project, which we would like to showcase. We would be having a series of exhibition panels, which explain the project in the form of drawings, hopefully some audio visuals. We do have some video recordings as well. An interview and an audio essay with one of the key people associated with the project, so that the project is seen through their eyes as how it got collaborated, and then so this is the sort of material that we have. We have pictures of some models. Of course, we have a whole bunch of drawings, presentation drawings. So on the top left corner, that is the studio in Delhi, the PSDA studio, Pradeep Sachdeva Design Associates working offices over here. And eventually, so the material that we're all collecting for the exhibition, we would like to also morph into a book of the selected few projects. Say, suppose we pick about these 8 to 9 projects under the various sections. We work through the exhibition, and then hopefully morph into publishing a book about the key projects.
Ask you again, as what is the sort of concerns that you feel that you have?
Mostly, I think as of now, we are currently in the process of collecting all the materials and putting all that together. And I think the main key concern that we had, which is of course an internal issue, is to how to raise funds, who are the stakeholders. I mean, we are in talks with some people about forming, a small organization or people who would be able to fund this whole thing. That is one concern. And the other concern is, again, as it's an internal matter of who will be running the archive. See, currently we are putting everything together. We're putting the material together. We're organizing the metadata, etc. But who will be running it? How will it grow further? So these are what were our concerns.
The archive is going to be a resource that the studio will possibly use to construct and develop the exhibition. So in a sense that, we will sort of not come in from the perspective of people who are creating the archives, but take on other roles because of our association with the studio in the exhibition making. And not central roles as such in the making of the exhibition and the book necessarily. There could be other people who would sort of come in and take on that role. So I think that's also a possibility that could be there.
Yeah, so I mean, I could see from one of your tables that you had different people taking over different roles, Ramu Katakam taking on one. Does that mean that they are individual curators for those spaces, or are they sort of contributing in terms of an idea or an angle to those specific sections?
I think they're mostly going to be contributing towards walking us through the project.
because they were in some way associated.
Because they were in some way involved, or whether they were the client, or whether they were a collaborator.
But I also wonder, in terms of the way in which you've structured the exhibition, why is it that only one project was chosen for each section?
Because we felt it was a good starting point, really. Because if we kind of got into it in further detail, we've shortlisted 139 projects.
Mm. And you've housed them under these
various headings.
So I feel that even if you speak in detail about one project, in order to sort of minimize your work thing, the other projects could at least be used as examples of future, in some way, even sort of slideshows or whatever else, in order to sort of say that these are the other projects that fit into this category.
Noted your point. Thank you.
Thank you for staying on so long.
I just wanted to ask how was your experience, Sarita, for today? Or you've listened to us more than so many hours.
I think all of you have done, quite a remarkable job of arriving at so many different sort of questions, and I think more than, I always like this sort of stage in a project when you're sort of throwing up all the various possibilities that are there. I know that all of you haven't sort of resolved stuff yet, but that's okay. I think I'm quite impressed actually with the sort of range of projects that are there and the different lenses through which everyone's looking at it. The different ways in which I feel that these projects can go, because I see so many different possibilities in which they can go, whether in terms of medium or in terms of storytelling or in terms of sort of how they, some of them I feel will need to have something like a front face, like the Patni project, which in order for you to actually access the deep archives that exist. And I feel that so even for the project in the Nilgiris or the project in Auroville, because there is so much, so there's such a density of material that's there.
We are also now, we'll move on to planning the show and tell that we were hoping to do at the end of this program after 4 months.
Thanks a lot, Nishita. And
thank you, Sarita. Thank you so much for staying along, listening to us.
I hope it was some use, but after all that.
I mean, it's not for me to say, it's really for everyone else to say, but I think them also staying for this long, I think speaks for itself that your responses were surely very helpful.